Most people think they can recognize intelligence at first glance. They believe a well-tailored suit, an expensive leather briefcase, and a few technical buzzwords are enough to identify someone qualified, someone who knows their stuff. But what if intelligence doesn't make noise? What if true knowledge comes wrapped in the humility of someone who's lived what many only read about in books? What if the most prepared person in the room is the one nobody takes seriously? This is one of those stories that shatter assumptions, that make us look twice before we judge, and that expose an uncomfortable truth. Prejudice still lives within the very institutions meant to fight it. The protagonist of this story knew that. That's exactly why she used her own body as bait. She walked into court wearing simple clothes, a calm expression, and silent steps, as if she had nothing to prove, but she had a lot to show. On the other side stood the judge, imposing, used to being revered, one of those figures who doesn't need to raise her voice to command respect. The robe speaks for itself. The problem? That robe also covered up a whole lot of arrogance. The moment she saw the defendant, she made up her mind. Another uninformed protester wasting the court's time. She didn't even look her in the eyes, didn't care to listen. She was there to judge, but forgot that judging without listening is the gravest mistake a judge can make. And that's when the story truly begins. The woman who appeared to be the defendant was, in fact, a renowned professor of criminal law, an internationally recognized researcher, a legal reform consultant, and an award-winning author of articles on abuse of authority. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was what she chose to reveal, and she chose to reveal the bare minimum, to provoke the maximum. She wanted to test the system, to prove that even in the heart of the judiciary, where impartiality should reign, labels still speak louder than facts. And she succeeded. The judge was harsh, cut her off, made sarcastic remarks, looked at her with disdain, all in front of a silent audience used to watching this kind of show. But this time, the script was about to change. When the defendant finally spoke, with precision, clarity, and an erudition that silenced the entire room, there was no more hiding it. They were facing someone far greater than they had assumed. She dismantled the accusation point by point, exposed procedural flaws, cited case law with absolute command, and in the end, revealed her true identity: silence, embarrassed stares. The judge, visibly shaken, tried to regain control, but it was too late. That woman had won, without yelling, without insulting. She had won using the one weapon no one could discredit: knowledge. And more than that, she wasn't there for revenge. She was there on a mission. The hearing became a national case, not because of legal complexity, but because of the brutal simplicity of the lesson. A humble, underestimated woman dismantled, with poise and preparation, the entrenched structure of rushed judgments and hidden bias. She proved that justice still slips on prejudice, that it still judges with its eyes, that it still silences voices that don't wear suits. This is one of those stories that leaves a mark, because it touches open wounds. It shows how far we still are from a truly just society, where the word equality looks good not just in written judgments but in lived experience, where every human being is heard, not filtered. And now that you know this story, let me ask you sincerely, how many times have you dismissed someone based on appearance alone? How many voices have you ignored because they didn't come from credentialed mouths? How many ideas have you discarded because they didn't come stamped with authority? Maybe the real issue with justice and with life isn't just the rules. It's how we interpret them, the rush to define others, the arrogance of thinking we already know everything, and most of all, the fear of admitting we have much to learn from those who, at first glance, seem to have nothing to teach. The judge went through a re-education process. She was summoned by the National Council of Justice, participated in public hearings, and had to face the very criticism she once ignored. And ironically, she began using the very arguments made by the defendant in her future rulings. Because knowledge transforms, even when it comes in the form of a harsh lesson. This story became a symbol. It was cited in law schools, used in debates about legal ethics, and served as the foundation for campaigns promoting active listening in the justice system. But most importantly, it remains alive. With every rushed judgment, it reemerges. In every look of contempt, it echoes. In every prejudice masked as formality, it screams. And you? Are you going to be just another cog in the system? Or someone who transforms it? Will you be impressed by appearances? Or will you listen beyond the surface? That woman didn't walk into that courtroom to be acquitted. She entered to prove that justice without empathy is just vanity wearing a robe. And she succeeded, because when truth is firm, not even the deepest prejudice can silence it. And if this story moved you in any way, if it made you rethink your judgments, if it stirred something inside, then join us. Here we don't just share content, we share awareness, and we turn every video into an invitation to reflect, because the world needs more listening, more empathy, and more courage to do things differently. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and help spread stories like this one. Because as long as people are still judged by what they wear, how they speak, or where they're from, there will be reason to keep telling these truths. Truths the system tries to bury, but reality keeps revealing. So tell me, which side of the story do you want to be on? Some people walk into a courtroom carrying more than just their name. They carry labels, assumptions, and the weight of a story that hasn't even been told yet. That's how Clara entered that room. Simple clothes, calm eyes, and a silence louder than any accusation. Judge Annie, used to judging before listening, gave her a dismissive glance, as if to say, just another case to rush through. And it's strange how often justice uses its scales just to keep up appearances. That scene, unfortunately, isn't as rare as we'd like to think. How many Claras have you seen out there? People who don't fit the mold and are pushed into corners before they even speak. Judge Annie didn't even try to listen. Clara was guilty the moment she walked in, simply for looking ordinary. And the worst part, this happens every day. In job interviews, in stores, in schools, and of course in courtrooms. These are stories, suffocated by silent judgment. But that's where life starts playing with certainty. What looks too simple to matter often hides a much greater purpose. And Clara, contrary to the judge's assumption, wasn't just another defendant. She had a plan, a disguise. And if you think you've seen this movie before, you have no idea what's coming next. Because some stories only make sense when you understand the reason for the silence. Clara wasn't there by chance. She was there by purpose. While many fight to escape unfair judgment, she chose to face it head-on, as part of a painful but necessary experiment. She traded her academic robes for simple clothes, her resume for silence, and the safety of the university lecture hall for the coldness of the defendant's bench. Her goal? To feel firsthand what so many Brazilians face daily, structural prejudice from the very institutions that should protect them. This story wasn't born from coincidence. It was born from mission. Behind that calm expression stood Dr. Clara Monteiro, one of Brazil's top constitutional law experts. A respected professor, she had spoken at international conferences, written articles cited in high courts, and still knew that no diploma could shield her from the raw reality so many face voiceless. Her disguise was her armor, a way to step into places no one would suspect, to expose what's hidden in plain sight. And so began one of the boldest stories ever lived inside a courtroom. That kind of strategy demands more than courage. It takes conviction. Clara knew that if anything went wrong, she had much to lose. Reputation, credibility, even personal safety. But fear didn't stop her, because when you've heard a grieving mother cry over injustice, or seen a black youth handcuffed without cause, you realize some stories can no longer be ignored. And what she did next shook the justice system like never before. It's easy to judge someone when you don't know the weight they carry. What few knew was that Clara held a PhD in constitutional law from Heidelberg University in Germany, and had studied human rights in The Hague. She was a reference. Her works were cited in legal exams, jurist panels, and the top universities in the country. But in that courtroom, no one saw any of that. Because some stories remain invisible when we only see what we want to see. Clara chose not to use her fame as a shield. She embraced anonymity to truly feel the impact of the prejudice she had denounced for years in classrooms. Have you ever stopped to think how many people pass by you every day with a brilliant life hidden behind a uniform, an accent, or worn-out clothes? She understood that to change the system you need more than theory. You need to immerse yourself in the stories people pretend not to see. That brave plunge made her more than a scholar. It made her a reformer. And the most remarkable part, Clara wasn't doing this out of revenge or ego. She did it because she believed the law shouldn't be a technical privilege, but a bridge to humanity. And that, my friend, takes more than good books. It takes living the stories no one else dares to write. In the next act, she would go from defendant to the most powerful voice in the room. The courtroom was ready for another quick ruling, One of those cases that pass without question. But Clara raised her hand, asked to speak with calm conviction, and for a moment time stood still. Judge Annie tried to deny her, tried to dismiss the discomfort, but Clara's technical authority made it impossible to ignore. And then, my friend, began one of those stories no one forgets after hearing. With precise vocabulary and absolute command of the Constitution, Clara dismantled, article by article, the weak case built against her. Her speech wasn't arrogant. It was firm, clear, and almost like a public class on real justice. She cited precedents, doctrines, jurisprudence, and with each word, held up a mirror that exposed the incompetence of those who tried to judge her without listening. The stories, silenced for years, seemed to speak through her. People in the courtroom began glancing at each other surprised. Lawyers scratched their chins, interns typed furiously, and even the judge straightened her posture, as if she realized she had lost control of the situation. Clara, still in disguise, made it clear she knew exactly what she was doing. And before anyone could interrupt, fate took another unexpected turn. Because when the truth shows up with elegance, it always finds a way to be recognized. And some stories gain strength precisely when authority tries to ignore them. No matter how hard she tried to maintain composure, Judge Annie no longer had the same confident look. With every argument Clara presented, something inside her unraveled, as if her once unquestionable authority was slipping through her fingers. But the real blow came when a legal scholar present stood up. "Excuse me, Your Honor, but this is Dr. Clara Montero," he said, in a firm voice. And in that moment, all the poorly told stories came knocking. The revelation hit the room like a bomb. The silence was almost awkward. The judge, stunned, tried to regain control with formal questions and attempted to justify her behavior, but it was too late. Clara didn't need to impose herself. Her story spoke for her, and in that moment, the authority that truly mattered wasn't the robes but the alignment between words, actions, and purpose. Watching someone be undone by their own arrogance isn't just a striking scene, it's a lesson in motion. Annie had dismissed a brilliant woman because of a silent, deep-rooted prejudice, and when confronted with the truth, she felt the discomfort many prefer to avoid, realizing they were wrong. That's the power of well-lived stories. They don't need to shout because truth, when clear, speaks for itself. And little did they know, this was only the beginning. It didn't take long for phones to start buzzing. A journalist who happened to be present captured part of Clara's speech in the exact moment her identity was revealed. It was the kind of content that didn't just inform, it exposed, confronted, and sparked debate. Within hours, social media was ablaze. And more than a complaint, what went viral was a living, pulsing story that laid bare the wounds of Brazil's judicial system. TV shows started debating the case. Legal websites, opinion columnists, even influencers began discussing the woman who disguised herself as a defendant to prove that prejudice still thrives in courtrooms. And that bothered a lot of people, because hearing about inequality in statistics is one thing. Witnessing it in real time against a respected name dismissed for looking ordinary is another. That's when stories become powerful, when they move from theory to undeniable evidence. Clara wasn't seeking fame, but she couldn't avoid it. Her actions exposed not just one judge, but an entire system that often fails to uphold its most basic promise, to listen before judging. And when the media turns a story into a symbol, it becomes a mirror for society, one that, while uncomfortable, needs to be faced. And like all things that shake foundations, this wouldn't stay confined to headlines. When the media noise reached the offices in Brasilia, the impact was immediate. The National Council of Justice, pressured by public outcry, issued an official statement. It was rare for cases like this to gain such swift recognition, but this story had struck too sensitive a nerve to be ignored. Clara was praised for her courage, innovation, and the calm with which she handled everything. Judge Annie, on the other hand, was added to the oversight agenda. For the first time in years, the judge was formally questioned for her behavior in the courtroom. The CNJ launched an inquiry not only into this specific episode, but into her conduct in other similar cases. After all, a story like this doesn't appear in isolation. Many other voices began to emerge, recounting similar experiences that had previously been buried in the cold corridors of bureaucracy. Clara had lit a flame that couldn't be extinguished. More than that, her actions began to inspire initiatives within the judiciary itself. Some committees began studying the creation of protocols to address subtle forms of prejudice, those not written into law but expressed in tone, in glances, in disregard. And that, my friend, doesn't come from a decree. It comes from reality checks. It comes from stories, like Clara's, that strip away institutional varnish and place humanity back at the heart of justice. And what she proposed next surprised even the skeptics. Clara knew that changing a verdict was good. But changing mindsets, that was revolutionary. That's why, instead of merely celebrating the recognition, she proposed a bold initiative, a national anti-discrimination training program for judges, prosecutors, and judicial staff. The idea was simple yet powerful, to teach empathy not as a feel-good concept, but as a tool for real legal impact. Because behind the robes are people, and behind people are stories that shape how they judge the world. The course included practical workshops, real courtroom simulations, and even testimonials from victims of institutional injustice. Clara brought in academics, social psychologists, and humanitarian law experts to build a dynamic, transformative curriculum. And it wasn't about indoctrinating, it was about opening eyes, showing that prejudice often hides behind formality, and only those who listen to stories with their hearts can deliver true justice. The project gained momentum, first in universities, then in smaller courts, until, surprisingly, Judge Annie herself enrolled in the program. To many, it seemed like a PR stunt, but to Clara, it was proof that even the most rigid structures can learn. And when someone who once made mistakes chooses to relearn, stories begin to change from the inside out. And that's exactly what started happening. Judge Annie joined Clara's course with suspicion, almost as if facing punishment. But slowly, something shifted. Hearing testimonies from wrongly imprisoned youth, from mothers never heard in court, from lawyers who lost cases before they spoke, moved her. It was different from reading reports. It was seeing pain in people's eyes, exhaustion in their voices, raw humanity within formality. And when we truly listen, some stories pierce us in ways we can never return from. At the end of the program, Annie did something no one expected. She went on stage and asked to speak. With a trembling voice, she admitted to judging Clara and many others, based on subtle biases she didn't even know she had. She said she would never enter a courtroom the same way again. This wasn't a rehearsed speech. It was a woman in the process of unlearning, growing from her own flaws. And it was there that many stories began to rewrite their scripts. The judge, now transformed, became a public supporter of Clara's project. She became an ambassador of the program in her own jurisdiction and helped convince other judges to join. From a symbol of arrogance, she became living proof that change is possible. Not because she was forced, but because she was touched by something bigger. The truth of a story lived with courage. And that's where everything connects. Because the true impact of an action is measured when it transcends its initiator. What began as a silent courtroom session turned into a national movement. Clara's journey reached documentaries, became thesis topics, and was debated on television, podcasts, and in classrooms. Universities adopted the case as required reading in ethics and legal practice courses. But more than an academic example, Clara became an inspiration. Because some stories were, when well told, don't just educate, they transform the world around them. Young law students began writing her messages, saying they finally understood the real role of justice. Professors revised their methods, and previously resistant judges began rethinking their own habits. Clara never sought applause, but her courageous gesture moved an entire generation. And the most beautiful part? The stories that grew from hers are like seeds, each one generating new ideas, actions, and real change in the system. And maybe that's the greatest legacy someone can leave behind. Not a cold statue in a marble hallway, but a trail of living awareness, still growing. Clara returned to academia, yes, but now as a symbol of a new way to teach, with truth, with listening, with soul. And if time teaches us anything, it's that when a story is guided by justice and empathy, it doesn't end. It simply begins again, in other voices, in other rooms, with new names, and that will still be talked about for a long time. Funny how life has a curious way of teaching us when we least expect it, doesn't it? Sometimes the biggest turnarounds don't come from grand speeches or courtroom decisions, but from well-placed silences, from looks that say everything, and from truths we spend years trying to hide, even from ourselves. This is one of those stories you don't easily forget, because it stirs something deep inside us. Judgment, the rush to categorize, the addiction to labeling, and most of all, the difficulty of truly listening. Clara arrived like so many others before her, in simple clothes with a calm but firm gaze, and a past filled with struggles that didn't show on her face. To most people in that courtroom, she was just another defendant, but she wasn't, and she never had been. The problem is that prejudice is too blind to recognize greatness when it doesn't come dressed in a tailored suit or carry a famous last name. Judge Annie, sitting in the seat of authority, didn't see Clara. She saw what she thought Clara was, and that mistake came at a high cost. Right from the start, Annie looked at Clara with the eyes of someone who already had a verdict in mind. Before any words were spoken came the look of disdain. Before any argument came the interruption. It was supposed to be a simple hearing, according to the case file, contempt during a protest. But stories are never simple when you truly take the time to listen, and Annie wasn't willing to listen. Not that day. Clara, however, with the calmness of someone who knows her own path, waited. As the judge spoke, Clara simply listened. She didn't talk back, didn't lose her temper, didn't seek validation. She knew that truth has its timing, and when that time came, everything changed. Because the young woman who appeared helpless was actually one of the most respected constitutional law professors in the country. She was there undercover, sent by a human rights organization, specifically to document abuses in lower court hearings. And Judge Annie, who thought herself above right and wrong, had just fallen into the trap of her own arrogance. The silence that followed the revelation was louder than any sentence. The judge, once so confident, shrank in her chair. And it wasn't just from shame. It was from the weight of the truth, from realizing that even after years on the bench, she still judged with her eyes, not her ears. She still treated appearance as a measure. And in that courtroom, before everyone, justice stood exposed. No robe, no shield, no excuse. Just the truth, written all over Clara's face. Now that you know this story, let me ask you honestly, how many times have you judged someone based solely on their appearance? How often have you missed a life-changing truth because you clung to a first impression? The hard truth is this: we make a lot of mistakes before we get it right. And the problem isn't just in the law, it's in how we apply it. Or worse, how we decide who deserves to be heard. After the incident, Judge Annie was summoned by the National Council of Justice. She was required to undergo a re-education process. Ethics, empathy, humanized conduct, all the things she once claimed to uphold but didn't actually practice. And do you know what hurt her the most? It wasn't the formal reprimand. It was realizing that the young woman she tried to humiliate didn't retaliate with anger, didn't stoop to her level, didn't use her power to destroy, but to teach. That is real justice. And these are the stories that need to be told. Because true justice doesn't come from the top of a bench. It comes from a watchful eye, from active listening, from the humility to admit you might be wrong, and above all, it comes from the courage to turn failures into learning. Clara showed us that, with dignity, with presence, with the strength of someone who doesn't need to shout to be heard, someone who doesn't need to humiliate to be respected. This story isn't just about a judicial mistake. It's about the opportunity we all have every single day are we to do better, to treat others better, to listen more, to stop measuring people by their clothes, their skin color, their accent, or their silence. It's about changing your lens, breaking out of autopilot, and understanding that each person carries a whole universe inside, that behind every seemingly ordinary face, there might be someone extraordinary. And if we don't learn to listen, we'll miss the best part of life, the stories that truly matter. Would you have Clara's courage? To stay composed in the face of humiliation, trusting that the truth would surface at the right time? Or would you have Judge Annie's humility in the end, to admit the mistake without trying to justify it? Because one thing is certain, either we change, or we keep making the same mistakes, just with fancier words. We may soften the tone, but the prejudice remains. And justice, like that, becomes just a decoration in the speech of those who never looked into someone else's pain. So I ask you now, are you going to be just another cog in the system, repeating what everyone already does? Or will you be part of the change? Will you stay silent when you see injustice? Or will you be the one who gives voice to those who've been silenced? Because in the end, it's not about laws, it's about people, about stories that touch us, disturb us, and move us. And if this story made you reflect, if it stirred something inside you, a memory, an experience, a mistake you don't want to repeat, then do this. Subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications. Join us. Because here, we don't believe justice is just a pretty word to write on a courthouse wall. We believe it's something to be lived, felt, practiced, every single day through small, meaningful actions. Come build this space with us, a place where words mean more than titles, where listening matters more than resumes, where the truth doesn't need to scream because it's respected from the start, a space where stories like Clara's aren't the exception, but the norm. Because as long as people are still being judged by their appearance, there will always be a reason to tell this kind of story, and to fight for a world where justice is truly equal for all. So, are you ready to help change this game?